This is a quick video showcasing the build with which I ended the Arch Nemesis League. It's a low-life self-cast Forbidden Rite Guardian that's centered around life and mana scaling. I stopped playing the character at level 97, and I just want to show you guys what I ended up with. Before I go any further, a couple of disclaimers. First of all, this is not a budget build. This was an end-of-league experiment in which I first theory crafted everything in Path of Building and then did my best to craft and or buy all the items, cost be damned. I wasn't keeping track of how many exalts I spent, but there are far better builds you can make with less money and time. Secondly, this build isn't even good. It's a bit clunky to play, doesn't work at all without very good gear, and is deceptively squishy despite the high armor and energy shield. This video isn't meant to be a guide for how to replicate the character. In fact, the character's name is Fake Build Do Not Replicate. Rather, this build is mainly for fellow theory crafters who either want to take some inspiration from the build's mechanics or are simply curious about the character. Before anyone asks why I don't just play another Forbidden Rite build, fuck you, I do what I want. Alright, let's get into the build concept. Forbidden Rite deals chaos damage to both enemies and myself, based on my maximum life and my maximum energy shield. To scale both life and energy shield, I use the Ivory Tower body armor, which grants global, flat energy shield based on my reserved life. I also take advantage of mana conversion to make the high investment into maximum mana turn into energy shield. Ivory Tower has an interesting way of enabling low life builds. Instead of preventing chaos damage from bypassing energy shield, like Chevron's Wrappings does, Ivory Tower causes the chaos damage that does bypass energy shield to be taken from mana before life. Because this build takes a lot of chaos damage from Forbidden Rite, redirecting chaos damage to mana solves one problem while creating another, which is that now I need to be able to survive the mana loss. If my mana is empty, then the chaos damage goes straight to life as usual. Consequently, I need a comfortable mana pool and very high mana recovery, which I achieve by stacking mana and mana recoup modifiers. The build has a total of 76% damage taken recouped as mana, which is actually more like 90% thanks to its 18% increased mana recovery rate. Before I get into gear and passives, I'll summarize the build's damage and defenses. Path of Building says the character does 14 million DPS while fully buffed, but that number is deceptive for a number of reasons. First, it assumes Forbidden Rite hits with all 10 primary projectiles, which essentially never happens. It also assumes the target has full wither stacks and that my flasks and Righteous Fire are active. Despite the misleading number, the DPS is actually pretty decent in practice as long as the boss isn't moving around too much and that they aren't instantly killing my wither totems. However, it's not the kind of DPS that most people expect out of this level of optimization. Defensively, I have 16,000 energy shield with a 10,000 HP molten shell. My armor is 52,000 without buffs and 69,000 with buffs. I also defend with 120% of armor while not on low energy shield, so my armor is more like 63,000 without buffs and 83,000 with buffs. Additionally, I have 3 endurance charges, 22% block chance, 90% crit reduction, 80% curse reduction, elemental ailment immunity, bleeding and corrupted blood immunity, and capped chaos resistance. Despite all this, I don't think the character is particularly tanky. It has no additional maximum resistances, no additional block or spell block, no evasion, no spell suppression, no debuffs to enemy damage, and no forms of instant recovery. If I played this again next league, I'd try to make the defenses a lot more well-rounded, particularly when it comes to elemental damage. There's something coming in patch 3.18 that I think would really help with that, but I'll get into that toward the end of the video. Let's go over all the gear. I bought a double corrupted Ivory Tower with increased damage and maximum life. Probably the best 2 mods for the way I built this character, since gem levels don't do much for Forbidden Rite. My helmet is a Mind Spiral, a great choice for this build for 2 reasons. First, the high flat mana and the mana conversion mod provide a ton of extra energy shield for the build. Second, the mana recoup is very important, and to my knowledge there isn't another way to get mana recoup on the helmet slot. My shield is a Prism Guardian. This is so that I can fit in 350% auras on my life pool with minimal reservation efficiency investment. It also provides some much needed dexterity and resistance. Since it was cheap, I grabbed a Corrupted Prism Guardian with 30% crit reduction as an implicit. The rest of my equipped items are rares, each of which was mostly self-crafted. We'll start with my weapon. It's a wand with 186 maximum mana, 157% spell damage, and some crit and cast speed modifiers. If you want me to go into more detail about how I crafted my gear, let me know in the comments, but I don't want to derail this video too much. My gloves have high life and mana, some intelligence, some resistance, and leech and unnerve as implicits. I have Ghost Reaver, so this life leech turns into energy shield leech. Intelligence is actually a very efficient stat for this build, as the flat mana from intelligence is converted to energy shield, and the percent energy shield is useful for obvious reasons. I also need a lot of chaos resistance on gear to make sure I'm capped and don't kill myself with Forbidden Rite. My boots have flat mana, flat life, movement speed, onslaught on kill, intelligence, chaos resistance, an abyssal socket, and some action speed. The abyssal socket is very efficient here and allows me to get some extra flat life, flat mana, and resistance. I could have gotten a better jewel than this one, but it's good enough. This ring is a cerulean ring with life, mana, mana recoup, energy shield, resistance, intelligence, and cast speed. The mana recoup comes from a veiled modifier, giving both flat mana and mana recoup. Cast speed is pretty important on rings here, as the newly buffed tiers of cast speed modifiers on rings are very efficient for one suffix slot. They're especially efficient on builds like this, which aren't able to get a lot of cast speed from passives or skills. The other ring is very similar, but is a vermilion ring instead. I'd have preferred that both my rings be vermilions, but I had to take what I could get with the late league fractured item market. My amulet is a synthesized amulet with % intelligence and % life. I have attributes and crit on the suffixes, while the prefixes are life, energy shield, mana, and once again mana recoup. The anointment is tranquility, which gives increased damage based on the increased maximum energy shield modifiers. Cast speed may have been better than the all attributes suffix, but I needed the dexterity to meet gem requirements. My belt is also a synthesized base, this one with mana recovery rate, bleeding immunity, and a small amount of resistance. The explicit modifiers aren't very interesting, just more life, mana, energy shield, resistance, and attributes. I had to grind a few labs to get this belt enchantment. I don't know for sure whether it works with wither applied by totems, but if it does, then it's a pretty important DPS boost, as I don't have very many sources of resist reduction or penetration for bosses. My flasks are a quartz flask for phasing, a diamond flask, bottled faith, and dying sun for DPS, and a quicksilver flask for mobility. As for my passive tree, we can start with my ascendancy. The most important node here is Radiant Faith, which gives me armor based on my reserved life, and energy shield based on my reserved mana. My other ascendancy notables are Harmony of Purpose for charge generation, Time of Need for curse resistance, and Radiant Crusade for more damage and some elemental resistance. I have one more ascendancy notable, Sanctuary of Thought, which is granted by the Forbidden Flesh and Forbidden Flame Jewels. Sanctuary of Thought is a Hierophant passive that makes me gain an additional 20% of maximum mana as extra maximum energy shield. Combining this with other sources of mana conversion, I have 43% of maximum mana gained as maximum energy shield. This mana conversion accounts for over 5,000 of my total energy shield. The rest of my passive tree is spread pretty thin. For keystones, I grab Unwavering Stance for the stun immunity, Zealot's Oath for energy shield regeneration, Pain Attunement for more damage, Ghost Reaver for improved leech, and Iron Will for a bit of extra damage with no downside. Beyond that, it's mostly just getting efficient sources of life, energy shield, mana, chaos damage, and spell crit. I should mention this evasion and energy shield mastery that I go out of my way to grab. It makes 30% of chaos damage not bypass energy shield, which is pretty important because it makes sustaining mana through Forbidden Rite's damage a lot easier. Aside from the Forbidden Flesh and Forbidden Flame Jewels, I also use this Watcher's Eye, which gives 10% of mana as extra energy shield and 20% mana recoup. I have one rare jewel in my skill tree, mainly for immunity to corrupted blood. The affixes aren't very good, but I had some trouble finding a jewel with 3 relevant mods and never bothered to look again. Ideally, this would also have some crit multiplier on it. Now on to gems. I use an anomalous Forbidden Rite because it has slightly better clear speed than the default gem, and because Forbidden Rite's single target DPS doesn't scale well with gem levels. Support gems are Awakened Greater Multiple Projectiles, Awakened Spell Echo, Awakened Void Manipulation, Increased Critical Strikes, and Increased Critical Damage. For auras, I have Determination, Zealotry, Purity of Elements, and Clarity on my life pool. On my mana pool, it's Discipline and Defiance Banner. Reserving mana is both good and bad on this build. It increases the energy shield that I get from Radiant Faith, but decreases the AoE that I get from Sanctuary of Thought. Reserving mana also means that I have to play a bit more carefully around my spellcasts, as I can survive fewer consecutive casts when Molten Shell is down. More on that a bit later. Other gems include Wither Totems, Flame Dash, Self-Cast Molten Shell, Valrighteous Fire, and a cast when damage taken setup with Despair, Assassin's Mark, and Summon Lightning Golem. I'm able to apply both curses because I have Whispers of Doom allocated on the tree. The Lightning Golem is great for a bit of extra cast speed, and also to activate the 10% more damage buff from Radiant Crusade. Valrighteous Fire is pretty risky to use on this build given how much energy shield it removes, but the burst damage is nice. A more defensive option would be to use Frost Shield instead. It's also worth noting that cast when damage taken is a great way to automatically trigger spells on Forbidden Rite builds, since they're constantly taking large amounts of damage. So here's how it all comes together. When I cast Forbidden Rite, it deals about 6,000 chaos damage to me, which is reduced by my 75% chaos resistance to 1,500. Thanks to the evasion and energy shield mastery, 30% of this 1,500 fails to bypass energy shield. The remaining 70% is taken from mana, which means every cast of Forbidden Rite makes me lose just over 1,000 mana. I cast roughly 4 times per second, so I'm losing about 4,000 mana per second. Recoup takes a while to ramp up, so if I just start spamming Forbidden Rite, I'm dead in 5 casts. I can avoid this by staggering my casts instead of spamming, which is fine for clearing maps since one spell echo is enough to clear most packs. However, against single targets, I would have to manually ramp up the frequency of my casts to let the recoup stack up. This is extremely clunky and risky if not done properly, so instead I simply manually cast Molten Shell whenever I intend to start spamming my skill. Molten Shell absorbs the self-damage for long enough that by the time it depletes, recoup is fully ramped up and I'm free to keep spamming indefinitely. I can still kill myself while mapping if I'm not paying attention, but at least the build functions well if I'm playing correctly. There's not much more to say about this character other than what I would do differently if I tried it again. What this build needs most is better defense against elemental and spell damage. There are various ways to deal with that, including spell block, spell suppression, and maximum resistances. It seems reasonable to invest less in energy shield and more in these other defensive layers. It would also be nice if mana sustain weren't so difficult to achieve. However, there may be a solution to these problems coming in patch 3.18. The Searing Purity Ascendancy Notable will be available to Templars through the Forbidden Flesh and Forbidden Flame jewels. I expect these to be prohibitively expensive, but they're game changers for Ivory Tower builds, this one included. Searing Purity causes 90% of chaos damage to be taken as elemental damage. That means it will be mitigated by elemental resistance instead of chaos resistance. More importantly, for this build it means Forbidden Rite's self-damage will be dealt to energy shield instead of mana, since elemental damage doesn't bypass energy shield. This has several consequences for my build here. First, the investment into mana can mostly disappear. I would need only 1/10 the mana recovery to sustain Forbidden Rite, and I can probably safely reserve the majority of my mana pool. The passives and gear affixes that previously went into mana can go into life, energy shield, other defenses, or damage. It may not even be necessary to use Prism Guardian to fit in auras if I don't need to leave my mana mostly unreserved. Not needing to use Mind Spiral or Prism Guardian enables using rare gear in those two slots, which means it's possible to cap spell suppression on gear alone. Since the self-damage would be mostly elemental now, I would be taking a lot of damage directly to my energy shield pool. However, this could be mitigated by increasing maximum resistances and using powerful energy shield recovery options. The build already leeches 20% of energy shield per second, but that can be increased to 40% with minimal passive tree investment. Additionally, I could use the Graven's Secret belt, which would convert my power charges into absorption charges. Absorption charges give energy shield recoup from elemental damage, which is perfect because Searing Purity causes Forbidden Rite self-damage to be mostly elemental. I haven't done extensive theory crafting with this idea yet, but I believe that the Searing Purity passive, had it existed in patch 3.17, would have dramatically changed the way I chose to play this build. It would be more well-rounded, with less total energy shield, but better defenses against elemental and spell damage, and less clunkiness in the playstyle. Nonetheless, I had been wanting to experiment with mana conversion as a way to scale energy shield for quite some time, so I'm glad I got to play the build as is. In any case, that's all I have to say for now. Let me know in the comments if you want any additional information, such as crafting tutorials or more detailed theory crafting for the Searing Purity variant of the build. I'll be putting out another video shortly with a more in-depth look at the Infernal Blow Slayer I played in Arch Nemesis League, as that character is easier to replicate and more well-rounded in general. I'm also mostly finished with the script for another long-form mechanics deep dive, this time into ailment mechanics. I'll put that out sometime during Sentinel League, whenever I have time to work on it. Thanks for watching.